Welcome everyone to My Generation podcast, sponsored by South Shore Senior News. South Shore Senior News is a monthly magazine, newspaper, in print as well as online. In addition to that, we have a Facebook presence, and the concept is to inform and entertain seniors on a regular basis, both seniors, their caregivers, and those who provide senior resources. Today we have on Dick Stone, also known as Richard Stone, formerly, who has recently written a book about the Mayflower II, many things that you may not know about the ship that awaits your visit in Plymouth Harbor. It's an interesting story that really is pretty astounding of how they rebuilt the ship and sailed it back to America as a gift to America, thanking us for our efforts in World War II. Dick has had legitimate work before becoming an author. Worked at HBO, NBC, ESPN, Disney as an executive. We're not going to hold it against him that he got an undergrad degree from Harvard University and then went on to UCLA to get a master's in journalism, which prepared him well to write this book. Welcome aboard, Dick.
Steve, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to your viewers and listeners in the South Shore area, which is where this replica is parked. The replica is actually on the screen, I guess, to my stage right, your left side of the screen, the opposite side of the blimp. And
Well, so tell me, so this is kind of a great story for our audience. What inspired you to tell it?
So this photo inspired me. So when I first saw this picture, I thought it was a Photoshop. I thought it was a fake. Actually, I thought, there's the boat, Mayflower, sailing into New York Harbor, blue skies, a blimp. I thought this can't be real. But it is. Turns out on July 1, 1957, this replica, sailed into New York Harbor, and the blimp was there. And National Geographic's most renowned photographer of the era, B. Anthony Stewart, took this photo, and it quickly became known as the photo of the century. And so the story, but I thought, well, what's the story behind this? There must be something. So this piqued my curiosity. And then we're not going to fast forward 50 years to September 2019, when Mayflower was relaunched at Mystic Seaport. It was redone, reconfigured. I mean, they refurbished it, did a great job. And the keynote speaker was Nathaniel Philbrick, author of Mayflower. And his keynote speech began with the Mayflower II. She's more than just the replica of a famous ship. She's a famous ship in her own right. ... And being a journalist by training, I thought, well, okay, why is she famous in her own right? Certainly has to be more than just the wood and varnish. So I started looking into this. And then what also struck me is that when I was in Plymouth some time ago, within the last year or so, as I walked from the rock to the replica, Plymouth Rock to the replica, there's a path, and on a large utility box is this image, the one behind me right now. And it's put there by the town of Plymouth. And it celebrates this particular part of the ship going into New York Harbor. So it struck me that it was resonating with the town. And from that point, I started looking into it and had the good fortune to find the children of the two prime movers behind this project. So there were two men that really collaborated to make the replica a reality.
Well, and so let me just interject here. So one of the parts of the story I really love is that the key protagonist and the hero is a PR guy, right?
He is. Well, there are really two people. You're correct. That Warwick Charlton was a PR guy. In fact, he was so good at it that Bernard Montgomery, General Montgomery, Monty, who beat the Desert Fox Rommel in North Africa, had young Warwick Charlton serve as his press agent, and he was on his staff in the desert in the north. So he was one, and his counterpart was a New Englander, financier and academic, Henry Hornblower, Harry, and the two of them had somewhat different motives behind wanting the replica, but when they met by chance, they thought, we should collaborate and make this a reality. And from Harry's standpoint, this is something he had thought about since he was a junior in high school. Hard to imagine. But when he was at Milton Academy, he wrote a paper that talked about wanting to do a replica and a museum and everything. So this is something that had been on his mind for quite a while.
So Harry was one of the founders of the Patuxent plantation.
That's correct. That was his childhood, really as a young boy, as a teenager. The museum calls it his teenage dream. It really was his teenage dream. And so I learned more about this because as I met with their children, so Harry's daughter, Hatsie Hornblower, lives a little north of Boston. And she was wonderful in terms of providing background and additional information about Harry. And Warwick's son, Randall Charlton, spends time in England and in the US, and he was incredibly helpful. So each one of them, having grown up with these famous fathers when they were each, let's say, in their teens, in the mid-50s, were able to give me insights that proved to be very helpful in understanding what was always behind this.
And so the incentive was twofold. One was to give a gift back to the United States for helping save the free world during World War II, and in particular, saving England. And then secondarily, from the American side, the plantation, now known as Patuxent, really needed a marquee value boat to bring excitement and revenue to the project.
That's true. So for the two of them, so Harry, from the beginning, he wanted to make this museum. When he was a young boy, he grew up where Plymouth Patuxent is right now. That was where he grew up. And he used to go arrowheading. He used to love to dig up arrowheads, and he was very meticulous, studied actually in high school and then in college with some of the finest archaeologists with Native American archaeology. And so he wanted to build a museum to honor the early settlers and the Native Americans that worked with them. And then after that was started, he was going to have Plymouth. It would be on the land where it is now, which is the family estate. And I thought, well, how'd they get here? I should have something about the boat. It'd be good to have a replica of how they got here. From Warwick's standpoint, he had been on Montgomery's staff, and after working with General Bernard Montgomery, Monty, remarkably, he was then assigned to the Pacific and worked with Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was the Supreme Allied, naval commander for British forces in the Far East. And of course, Queen Elizabeth II used to love calling him Uncle Dickie. So he worked very closely with these guys. And he realized, and he had seen firsthand, the role that America had played in defeating the forces of tyranny in Second World War, both in Europe and in the Pacific theater. And he thought, we should thank them for something. What's Britain ever given to the U.S. other than some Guinness and a couple of tweed coats, a few professors? I mean, look at the French. They gave him the Statue of Liberty. What have we done? And he said, I know what I can do. They're the richest country on earth. There's nothing money can't buy that they can't get. But I could give them a piece of their lost history. The ship that famously brought those 1620 pilgrims to America, an event that connects our two countries tighter than virtually anything. And it does go back 4 centuries plus. And that's what got into his head. And he thought, something, I'm going to do this. I'm going to build it and deliver it. Of course, everyone thought he was a little crazy.
Dick, can I interject that the only challenge he had was to raise funds to do this? Then he had to find a boatyard to build something that was a replica of something that was several hundred years old. And then he had to find a crew that was capable of sailing it back here.
Minor details, right?
Yeah,
I
right.
mean,
Yeah.
for him, he's thinking, well, how hard can this be? So you're correct. So he had to be quite a promoter and creative force behind this because it was an expensive project. He had no money. Um, and truly, he didn't have a bank account until about a year before the project started, which is hard to imagine in this day and age. But he didn't have that. So he had to, how am I going to pay for this? By coincidence, there are a lot of coincidences in this story. The Walt Disney Company produced a movie that was extremely popular called Treasure Island in the early 1950s. And it changed people's perceptions about buried treasure and loot, and tall ships like this one that you see on the screen. And he thought, the original Mayflower was a cargo ship. I'll make this one a cargo ship. And I'll put treasure chests on it. And we'll put the finest products from Britain and sell them in America. And maybe I can get people to help sponsor this. And that's what he ended up doing. And that ended up accounting for about 80% of the revenue to fund the construction and sailing of this of the ship.
Okay. And then just for those
And by
who,
the way,
yes, go ahead.
one of the things that this had was a cat on board. So there was a cat named Felix. And by coincidence, you know that dogs sometimes react to cats. So merely the thought of this cat is making my dogs chirp with joyous anticipation of finding
Thank
it.
you for that animation.
So
Yeah.
that's the explanation of what you hear in the background.
Oh, okay. Very good. And so just to bring people up to speed who may not be aware of this, a lot of tourists show up at the Mayflower II and they think it's the original, right? They don't make any distinguishing thought of, maybe this thing has been recreated to its exact size. Can you illuminate folks as to what happened to the original boat?
Well, I can, and the exact size is a good question too. So the original, this thing was here in 1620, chiseled 1620 in that rock some decade, centuries later. It went back, and in 1624 it was declared in ruins, and that was the end of it. But of course, its spirit lived on for this. The challenge that they had, and Harry really deserves the credit for this, as his team of executives at Plymouth Plantation started thinking about this ship, uh, they needed a plan for it. So they found a naval architect named William Baker, who went back to, and he was a scholar. He worked for Bethlehem Steel, and when not building modern ships, he spent his time looking at ancient ships like this. And so he had to go back through ancient records, through the Queen, from original Queen Elizabeth, and he found them. So he found what seemed to be this Mayflower. So there were lots of ships named Mayflower. He found lots of them in the registry of from 16 whatever, and there was one that had a gap in its history that would correspond with the time the original Mayflower sailed. So he found that. He found some other things, and working backwards, he was able to redesign a what all scholars agree is a very close replica of what the exact ship would be. And in fact, it was so accurate. In my book, I point out that if suddenly the passengers appeared from the afterlife and landed on that replica, they would think they're on the original ship. It's that close to the design of it. So taking that further, because Charlton and Harry, but really Charlton got really obsessed with making this a totally accurate reproduction. So there were no modern tools used. They used hand saws. They had to go back to find how to make sails out of fiber as they would have used them, how to use the lines and everything. So this was done without modern tools or anything. To find that place, he found a shipyard in southern England, in Brixham, which was really the best yard in the nation for building wooden ships. And during the Second World War, the Admiralty, British Admiralty, had engaged them to produce wooden minesweepers that could be undetectable by radar. So they had been producing ships nearly this long. They were well known to the British maritime authorities, and they were selected to it. But Stuart Upham, who was the head of it, he said, "Look, guys, you can't forget a ship like this has not been built here in our nation for more than 300 years. And by the way, there's a lot more to building a model and getting something that's going to sail, men have to live on, and it has to head out across the ocean." So that was the challenge. I can tell you a little bit about the captain and crew, which is kind of
Yeah, I
interesting.
think that's the interesting part of actually sailing it over.
That's the big thing. So,
Yeah.
so the man who was the captain of this Mayflower II was a man named Alan Villiers. So Alan Villiers was the foremost square-rigged mariner in the world at this time. Prior to I mean, he had learned to sail on these gigantic windjammers in the 20s and 30s. Just before the outbreak of World War II, he circumnavigated the world in a square rigger called the Joseph Conrad. So he knew what to do, but you have to find the men. So people that had served with him back then, and then subsequently, he was the captain in John Huston's filming of Moby Dick in the North Sea. So he regathered that crew. So his senior mates were men that had grown up in the age when sail was being driven from the sea by steam. When steam was, they were men born out of their time. The crew itself, however, most of whom had never been on a ship like this before, and when they actually set out to the voyage, none of them really knew quite what they were doing. So it was a real test. The voyage itself would be kind of a pass-fail test. His original plan was to take a northern route, which would have retraced the 1620 voyage. However, since the time of the Titanic, the British navigation authorities started keeping track of icebergs. And there was a slight risk that some ice was still floating around on their route in April when they were heading out. So after 5 days out, he decided to turn south, which then took him down towards the Canary Islands, went past that group, and then went west, what they call the Path of Columbus. And then when he got to Bermuda, he turned right. The last day almost before they made it in, they had a pretty calm voyage most of the time, but they encountered a major storm, and the ship was nearly keeled over. I mean, it pitched to 48 degrees, according to Stuart Upham, and he knew what 48 degrees felt like on a ship. But it didn't. So it survived. The crew survived. That scene in the book is unbelievable. But I mean, it's a true story. Everything in this book is true. So, but that's Villiers captaining the ship. The interesting thing is he learned about it from the editor-in-chief of National Geographic, who sent him a note in 1955, and he said, "Alan, I know you're in England and you probably have been reading about this voyage they're planning. They're rebuilding the Mayflower, and it's supposed to be historically accurate. Why don't you go down and see if there's a story for us here? And if there is, I'd like you to write a story about this for the magazine." So Alan Villiers takes listens to his editor in New York, goes down to Plymouth. He meets up with Warwick Charlton. He then sends a note back to his editor. He said, "You're not going to believe this. They want me to captain the ship." So I'm imagining here's Alan Villiers. He has a pen in one hand, and the other hand is holding the wheel. And that's how National Geographic became so tightly entwined with this, which is remarkable. So going on with this story. So with Warwick, the man that's this master of promotion, early on when he's struggling with finances, Life magazine then comes to him and says, "Look, if you ever sail this, if it ever really gets done, we would like to buy the exclusive rights to the photography, the images and the to take onboard photography and writing." So he sold those to Life magazine for £1,000. 2 weeks before the voyage, this is like a year and a half before they're setting sail. Still, who knows if they're going to make it. Once it became certain they were going to sail, Perry Match, the French publication, came to see Warwick, and they said, listen, we want to be on the ship too. I said, well, you can't, because Life has the exclusive rights. However, for 10,000 pounds, 10 times what Life paid, he said, I'll let you sail around in the bay before we go, and if your camera angles are right, no one will even know. So he was quite bold with that, but the popularity grew to the extent that it would be there. What they didn't realize, so we have National Geographic taking the picture that's behind me. You have Life magazine taking photos that famously appeared on the cover of Life magazine. But days before the ship was set to sail, the project's chief financier, a guy named Felix Fenston, told Alan Villiers, he said, look, I have matters in London, I can't go. And so there was an empty spot available in the crew. And Villiers invited a man named Lee Israel. Lee Israel was the founder of the Mayflower Studios, co-founder of the Mayflower Studios in London, which began, sometime before actually Project Mayflower. But he's the one that documented all the photos at Brixham and elsewhere prior to the voyage. He now is on the ship, and just a few months before this book went to publication, I happened to find Lee Israel's son, Alan Israel. And I said, I'm looking for some photos. He said, well, my dad took all these pictures. They're crystal clear. I have a boxes of them. Sure, what would you like? So in this book are photos that no one has seen before, and they were taken with a Hasselblad camera by a professional photographer. And of course, he didn't mention it because of the pre-existing agreement with Life, National Geographic, but now, nearly 70 years later, they've been rediscovered, and they're just spectacular with, when you see them, and we've colorized some of them, which are even more exciting. So, and he was pretty interesting. He was from Butte, Montana, where boys learn to ride a horse before they learn to walk, and his story is pretty interesting. But this voyage, to kind of get back to Philbrick's comment, she's more than just a replica of a famous ship. She's a famous ship in her own right. The objective was to thank America for its sacrifice in World War II. That's what the initial driving force behind it was. As they're go on.
No, I was going to say, it's a wonderful book with lots of photos, a lot of the inside stories. And I want to give people the sense that they should still read the book. There's plenty more there.
I keep
It's
going
a
on and
handsome
on.
book. It's available at major bookstores, at Amazon, on your website. What's the best way to reach you? Also, potentially, there are folks out there who might want to have an author talk, a book signing. What's the best way to reach you?
So the easiest way, obviously, the easiest way to reach me is through my website, which is called Mayflower Event News. If you go to Mayflower Event News, there's a contact page, and you can hit contact, and we'll get right back in touch with you. We also have a Shopify page, Project Mayflower on Shopify, where we have signed copies of the book. I signed the book, and we put in a bookmark. It's also available in all Barnes and Nobles. It's available in independent bookstores every place. Walmart, remarkably. So they can buy it before it comes out, or at any time. They can buy it online from Amazon. It's certainly so it's at Amazon, other online booksellers, any independent bookstore you go into. If they don't have the book, they'll be able to get it quickly. And it's in all Barnes and Nobles. So they have it in their warehouse. So I was almost at a dozen Barnes and Nobles over the last few days. And their comment to me was, wow, this is pretty amazing. It's in our warehouse. Remarkable for a first-time author in a book. But this book strikes a chord. And I think that's why, and when you read the book, you realize there's a reason she's a famous ship in her own right. And I'll leave you to read the book to find out.
Well, Dick, thank you. I think you gave us a real incentive to pick up the book and read the full detail for ourselves. I've enjoyed reading it. I recommend it to others. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, take care.